Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary, Lisa Nandy, who joins us now. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, you're giving a speech today linking foreign and domestic policy, and I will come to that, but I do want to ask you about this major report that's come out today, the landmark report by the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, headed by Tony Sewell, which says that there's no evidence that the UK is institutionally racist, and that indeed we're a model, indeed a beacon for a successful multi-ethnic society to show up around the world. Do you agree?
Well, I think we're a great country, but I think it's deeply depressing to see the briefings that have come out overnight about this report, seeming to suggest that we're somehow going to downplay structural racism when Black Caribbean boys are 3.5 times more likely to be excluded from school, 4 times more likely to be arrested than their white counterparts. It's clear that there are structural problems of racism in the country. I believe this is a great country. It could be even better if the government got on with implementing the very many recommendations of the very many reports they've commissioned over the last decade about racial inequality in this country.
Well, yeah, there's certainly not much point government spending money and time on reports if they're not going to actually look at the suggestions about what to do. But you say downplaying structural racism. Well, Tony Sewell and his fellow commissioners say, well, there isn't structural racism. There are other issues. And you mentioned, for instance, one example there, Black Afro-Caribbean boys more likely to be excluded from school. But actually, if you look at the stats in terms of, what's happening at school and in the criminal justice system and other areas, often actually it is white working class boys who are also at the bottom of the pile. So it's not necessarily a race issue. It's often more a socio-economic issue, which is something that this report states that actually a lot of the problems we've got are there are inequalities, but they're not necessarily down to race or racism. That's a major issue in this country, isn't it?
Yeah, well, what I'm hoping to see when I read the report, and I haven't read it yet, it comes out at 11:30 this morning, but when I read the report, what I'm hoping to see is a far more nuanced understanding of what is happening in our schools, in our criminal justice system, in our workplaces than these briefings suggest. The truth is that race, class, gender, all of these things are interlinked. And it means that some people face far greater barriers, far greater hurdles, whether intentional or otherwise. They face far greater structural barriers than other people in order to succeed. And that is something that successive governments have said they wanted to change. Theresa May commissioned her own report into it that made a series of recommendations. We had the Lammy report, we've had the Home Office's report into its own practices in relation to Windrush. We know what to do. The government knows what to do. And what we need to see now is less of these reports and more action.
Okay, but again, in terms of action, we now know, don't we, that actually the action that will most help the most young people, but in particular of who are ethnic minorities in this country, will actually be helping working class communities across the board, improving schools, improving housing, improving job opportunities in some of the poorest locations. It doesn't really matter in those cases whether you're black or white or Asian or any other ethnicity. If those opportunities aren't there for you, go to a rubbish school and the parents haven't got a job, that's going to affect you pretty much the same. So tackling those issues perhaps might help more kids from all backgrounds rather than focusing on colour of skin.
Look, I completely agree with you, Julia. I don't think it should in any way be a question of trying to pit white boys who are underachieving against black boys who are underachieving. That would be appalling. But you've got to recognise too that 46% of black British families live in poverty compared to just 1 in 5 white families. There's clearly a problem there. We've seen it in the pandemic where black and Asian people have been dying in greater numbers from this virus.
But not because they're black or Asian.
No, but in part because they're more likely to be living in poor, overcrowded housing, because they're more likely to be working in low-paid jobs without the ability to social distance.
And they're more likely to live in cities where it's spread quicker.
Yeah, and that's something we've got to take seriously. Where are the opportunities for young people from those black and minority ethnic backgrounds? Okay. Why are so many of them having to go into low-paid professions? That's something that we need to take seriously.
Because they go to rubbish schools where they don't get qualifications, because so many of those inner city schools are rubbish.
I tell you what I see in my own constituency. You mentioned white working class communities. What I see is schools that are working very hard to try and raise standards. But over the last 11 years, all of the support outside of school has been stripped away. Those kids are coming to school too hungry to learn. Those are the sorts of issues this government should be dealing with.
Can I just double check? Do you agree on the unconscious bias training being an end to funding of that? Have you had your unconscious bias training at the Labour Party?
I've done it, actually. I did
you discover how racist you were?
I did it with Eric Pickles, which I can tell you was quite an experience.
I'd have paid good money to watch that. Now that is a Channel 4 democracy. What's the word? Documentary, if ever there was one. Did you discover that you were unconsciously racist?
Well, I think we all found it quite useful, actually.
No, are you unconsciously racist, Lisa?
I tell you what I did discover is that there are certain things that you do or say in your daily life that you don't realise have an impact on other people. I first learned that when I worked for the Children's Society and did training about disabilities. Didn't realise that, when you're talking to somebody with a disability, you've got to make sure that you're not talking to them as if they can't understand, they can't comprehend what you're doing. And there were certain things that I was doing unconsciously at that time that were having an impact on other people. And I really welcomed the opportunity to understand that and to learn and to fix it. I'm not worried about being open, laying myself open to criticism. I want to live in the sort of country where we take care of other people. And I think these sorts of schemes are actually quite helpful if you take them with the with the right intent.
Yeah, even though we have no evidence they actually work at all. Let's talk about the speech you're making, first major foreign policy speech, and you're going to be looking specifically today at linking foreign policy and domestic policy. What do you mean by that?
Well, for far too long, we've had a settlement where foreign policy and domestic policy have been treated as separate. A few weeks ago, the government launched their Global Britain policy without any reference to the lives of people in towns across this country. But look at what has happened over recent decades. We've seen an economic model, particularly pushed by China, where wages have been depressed, where jobs have been outsourced and offshored, where communities as a consequence have been stripped of their spending power, their high streets, their assets, their young people. And we've got to end that system. That means that we need to go out into the world and work with our allies to raise the working and living standards of working people.
Okay, and
that can be done. The Biden administration is pursuing a very similar agenda, and the next Labour government will make it our mission to restore good jobs and dignity back to those communities that have been stripped of them in recent decades.
Might help if you stop supporting lockdown policy that's taken those jobs away. But are you happy to wrap yourself in the flag?
I like the flag. I really like it. I mean, I was talking to a friend this morning. I associate the flag with VE Day parties, socially distanced this year, of course. I associate it with the Olympics. I mean, I like the flag. I appreciate that other people have mixed feelings about it, but for me, patriotism is about more than just flags. It is not patriotic to wrap yourself in the flag, clap for our nurses, and then give them a pay cut, to wrap yourself in the flag, invoke the armed forces, and then make them redundant. We've got to have a better settlement in this country. We've got to go out and fight for the people of this country, and that includes foreign policy as much as anything else.